Hi, I'm Dave. I've been doing a series of videos of my 25-year career in federal law enforcement. I did natural resource, fish and wildlife enforcement, protecting public lands. I started out with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and then eventually I was a special agent with NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service, Department of Commerce. And so I do these videos to explain what I did. It's history, things have changed. And so understand that when I'm talking about what I did, things may be better. Hopefully they are. So tonight, I'm discussing my time, a very brief time as a Bureau of Land Management, Department of Interior, um, District Law Enforcement Ranger stationed in Rock Springs, Wyoming. So in the Park Service, I worked at Fort Laramie in Wyoming, and I really liked Wyoming. It's a beautiful state. It's very diverse. It's huge. And at the time, I was working for the National Park Service at Harper's Ferry National Historic Park and the Appalachian Trail, and I loved it there. It was an amazing job, but I wanted to move up, make more money, and being in the Park Service, while it was a great job, it was also a lot of babysitting, and I wanted something where I could focus just on natural resource violations and have a big area to patrol. So I took the district ranger position. I applied for it, put in for it, and I thought this is going to be really cool. And I was very disappointed with my first job with the Bureau of Land Management in Wyoming. And that's what I'm going to discuss. I had high expectations and it kind of fell short. And that's just me. Maybe other people would have seen it as a perfect job, but it wasn't a perfect match for me. So I move and I live in Green River, which, Rock Springs is kind of not the most beautiful place. Green River's a pretty nice little town, maybe 20 miles away or less. But when I first get to the BLM, I'm going to use BLM as the term from now on. It took almost 3, 4 months for me to get my law enforcement commission. And so right there was that's a negative. I had already gone through FLETC. I had been in law enforcement by that time 7 or 8 years. It was 1997. I was only there for less than 2 years in Rock Springs. But I'd been in law enforcement with the Department of Interior, so I went through the Basic Police for Land Management 9PT 206 at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. And so I go from being in the Park Service to BLM, and it's like a forever wait to get my commission. And I was like, why? What's the holdup? Well, the SAC. Now, understand at that time, BLM Ranger, as a district ranger, I worked under a district manager, a non law enforcement supervisor. And the special agent in charge in Cheyenne, he was kind of the law enforcement coordinator, but I didn't work for him. But he was like, well, we're real police and we get sworn in by the deputy director in Cheyenne. Okay, great. Why is it taking months? Like I said, 3 to 4 months. I didn't have a law enforcement commission. And so the range crew, they have like range specialist. They had a Dodge pickup truck, an old Dodge pickup truck, and they said, "Well, just take this truck and go out there and learn your area." And so I didn't have law enforcement commission. I'm just driving around, and I'm like, and I'd come to the office, and I spent a lot of time reading the rules, the regulations of the BLM, the history of the BLM, and I learned a lot about the history by just reading all these documents and books and rules. One thing is, you hear a lot of people discuss the Constitution, and I want to bring that up real quick because a lot of people in the West say, "Well, you have no constitutional authority. The BLM shouldn't be allowed to have so much land." Yes, it should. when you read the Constitution. So, first you have the treaty clause. So, 99.9% of BLM lands came about because of federal treaties, such as the Treaty of the Louisiana Purchase, the Hidalgo Treaty that after the Mexican War, the Oregon Treaty with England that we got the Pacific Northwest, and Seward's Treaty with Alaska, buying Alaska from Russia. And so all these lands that we bought through these treaties and acquired through treaties went to what was called then the General Lands Accounting Office, which was started by Thomas Jefferson during the Louisiana Purchase. And then you have the property clause of the U.S. Constitution saying if a territory wants to become a state, it has to agree to allow the federal government to continue to have any ownership in property that the federal government already had. That's why states like Wyoming or Nevada's got like 85% of Nevada's federal property. Well, that's in the Constitution. Same thing with Wyoming. There were some lands that were sold over the years through the Homestead Act, but a lot of the land people didn't want. You can't grow crops at 12,000 feet on a mountaintop or out in the desert. You can graze cattle, but it's like, why own the land and pay taxes when you can just use federal property? But back to me, a couple months, and I'm waiting forever to get my law enforcement commission. And honestly, I was already looking for a new job. I was like, this is effed up. I've already been a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Refuge law enforcement officer. I've been a National Park Ranger law enforcement. Hey, BLM, give me my badge and gun, okay? Don't make me wait forever. And that's what they did. And at that time, they did that to a lot of people that transferred over from Park Service or Fish and Wildlife. You waited forever to get your law enforcement commission. And I was like, there's no excuse for that. It should be instant, just like that, because I've gone through the same training that BLM Rangers had to go through. And I had a federal background checks. And, you know, there's no excuse for it. Maybe that's changed. 1997 was a long time ago. So finally, I got sworn in by the director of the BLM there in Cheyenne. And, like, here's your badge, a picture taken. It's like, okay, I'm ready to go out there and kick some ass, right? Well, I had a gigantic area. So let me show you on a map of my area. Hopefully, this conveys here. This is the state of Wyoming, and my area came kind of like that. Went up along the Forest Service boundary all the way up to Jackson Hole, down here past Evanston, the Utah Colorado border, 8 million acres. Now, at first it seemed like, wow, that's pretty cool. 8 million acres. That's bigger than Yellowstone. But then I started to realize after reading the rules and regulations, learning what the authority is of the BLM, it's very, very limited. Okay? The BLM just doesn't have much authority. Unless, when I went to the BLM in California, the sheriffs in Humboldt, Trinity, and Mendocino counties gave me sheriff's commissions. So I had deputy sheriff authority, meaning I can enforce state law in California. And I went through extra training called PC 832. But in Wyoming, I didn't have state peace officer authority, meaning I could only enforce BLM laws. And that meant that in all reality, as a BLM ranger, district ranger, it was a GS11. I had AUO. I took 15%, so I had to work extra hours. Um, but I didn't have the same authority like the Park Service had. Where in the national parks, you can enforce anything: fish and game laws, domestic violence. You could do DUI arrest. You could do, theft, people stealing from one another, car break-ins. You could do all this stuff the Park Service. In BLM, you didn't have that power. You were basically a armed security guard. I know a lot of BLM Rangers hate that, but it's true. You're an armed security guard that protects government property, rocks, trees, Native American artifacts, fossils, dirt, sand, things that the government owned, oil and gas. This is where your authority was. The only thing that was living that you had real authority over was wild horses. You did have some federal wildlife laws, Endangered Species Act, Lacey Act, Migratory Bird Treaty Act, but that was it. And you know, in Wyoming, what's the big thing there? What's fish and game enforcement? And I had really hoped to be able to do some poaching investigation. No, you don't do that. You if a county road runs through millions of acres of BLM, you have no jurisdiction on that county road or state highways. Okay, you don't. If you see a DUI, you call it in and say this guy looks like he's DUI. You can't. But in the Park Service, a county or state highway running through the park, you had jurisdiction. At least where I worked. But BLM, it was you know ATV use, off-road vehicle stuff. Like I said, firewood theft, ARPA, Archaeological Resource Protection Act, dumping, fossil theft, which was big there, but it was for one man, it was impossible to enforce. 8 million acres. I mean, literally, it was like from one end to the other end of my district was three different field offices: Rock Springs field office, Pinedale field office, Kemmer field office. You know, it's just massive. And once I started patrolling, you try to hit the areas where there's the most public use. And I remember, like, okay, the Kilpecker Sand Dunes. You'd run up there and be like, okay, 4th of July. I remember going up there and, like, okay, there's supposedly off road vehicle use in the sand dunes, ATVs. Let's go see if they got their flags and their registration, green stickers, I think it was, and helmets and that kind of stuff. And I go up there on the 4th of July and it was like three people in the sand dunes. Very interesting place. I mean, there's these little ponds in the sand dunes where snow melts, ice melts because it gets so much snow in the wintertime. There's an elk herd out in the sand dunes. Very amazing, interesting geologic place. Boar's tusk, but nobody was out there. Now, understand Rock Springs area, Pinedale area, Kemmer, it's that area of Wyoming's boom or bust. And I was there during a bust time. So it's oil and gas is the main thing that runs the economy. When there's a boom for the oil and gas industry, then there's a whole lot more activity going on. But it was kind of this was during the Clinton administration, and it was just not the number of oil and gas wells now is probably 100 times more than when I was there. So what did I do besides just drive around? Well, part of at least 2 million acres of my 8 million acres was checkerboard along the I-80 corridor where it was railroad lands. And it's complicated to discuss the history of how the checkerboard came about. These were 650 acre squares, like a checkerboard or a chessboard, and every other proper section was BLM. The next section, 650 acres, was private, and it was private grazing association. I made some really good. So I think during my whole time there, I wrote like a dozen tickets, but I made some good dumping cases. You really had to become an expert on GPS in that area to know exactly where you were because there's no boundary markers. So I made some really good dumping cases because it was close to Rock Springs. People didn't want to go to the dump, or contractors building homes would just dump their garbage. And I worked with occasionally, I didn't have a military GPS, I had a regular one. So there was some back then some error they built into the GPS because they didn't want it to be too accurate. Only the military ones were super accurate. So if you were, I forgot what it would be, but it's like 25 yards difference. So you had to be in really solid BLM, and sometimes it'd be really close. But if it was a dumping case, I'd call in, the range detective that worked for the grazing company. Said, "I got a dumping case I'm working on. It's kind of close on the boundary. Do you mind if I go ahead and run with it? I think I can make a federal case." And they were the guy that I would work with, who was deputized by the sheriff's department. He'd be like, "Yeah, go ahead. We got to stop this dumping. It's a problem. We don't like it either. We want it ended. If you can make a case, even if it's kind of close to the boundary, go for it." So I made some good dumping cases there. I hate people that litter. And this isn't just like a few tin cans. This is like piles of garbage. It was like, this is BS. You know, you're a pig if you dump garbage like that. The special agents, there were two of them. One was really good, the other one was not very good. They had made some fossil theft cases dealing with dinosaur bones, and there was a lot of it. But again, working by myself, I just was unable to really grasp everything that's going on there. So I did work the dumping cases. I'd go to Farson. There's the Farson fish beds where people, there were signs where people had gone in with bulldozers or backhoes and just dug out hillsides to get these slabs with fish on them. Some of them would go for thousands of dollars. This was going on, but it's like you got to spend an enormous amount of time and you need help doing that. And I had no help. As a GS 11 district ranger, I had the 8 million acres, and that was it. And the agents did their own thing, and they wouldn't talk to me about what they were doing. I kind of understood it, but at the same time, it made it difficult. Wild horse cases, they were going on, but the agents worked them. That took more complexities of finding out who would shoot and kill a wild horse. And again, that's a complex long term case. The special agents would take that, they did their own thing. So, what else would I do? Besides just drive around? Well, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of campers that would stay over their 14-day limit. So you had 14 days, and then you'd have to move, like 10 miles or so. And what would happen is in the summertime, uh, hunters would set up campsites in the prime locations and just leave them there all year round into the fall where they would hunt and they'd go to their trailer. And the ones that I could see and document from driving around, put a sticker on it, hey, you've been here 14 days. You need to move it. If it's not moved in a week or so, you're going to get a ticket. The ones that had plate numbers on them, I'd write tickets. Those that didn't, then it became difficult. And it wasn't like you could just say, hey, let's just tow these in and pull them off the land. It was more complicated than that, especially back then. I didn't have that capability. But you GPS them. Yeah, it's on federal land. It's on a solid chunk of BLM. They've been there 20 days, and I would had a logbook and I would write it in. Okay, yeah, I saw this trailer. After 14 days, I put the sticker on it. It's still there. They're not moving it. Um, it's locked. I'd make sure nobody was in there. Did someone commit suicide? You don't know. But if it's locked, I couldn't get in. So now what? And if they had their plate numbers on it, I'd track them back and be like, write them a ticket. Usually they lived in Rock Springs. Like, here's your ticket. You've been there past 14 days. I've put a sticker on there. I gave you ample notice. You got to move it. Get it off. Um, Another ticket I wrote. Hunting season was big. Unfortunately, I didn't have Fish and Game Authority. I would have loved to have made fish and game cases, but we didn't have that authority. Oh, This is Bruno, by the way, and he wants attention. Say hello, Bruno. Okay, time to go down. I had one guy just driving through the desert. This was over near Kemmer. No, actually, it was near Farson. It was close to Farson. And he's just driving through the desert with a gun out the window, hunting antelope. That's how he was hunting antelope, which is a state violation, but driving off roads and trails, established roads and trails, was a violation of BLM law. So I wrote him a ticket. Well, that the congressman, everybody in Wyoming knew about that ticket. It's very political there. It was back then, at least. And fortunately, the congressman, even though it went to him and he was ticked off, why are you writing this outstanding citizen of Wyoming a ticket? Um, One of the congressman's assistants, a lady that lived in the Rock Springs area, I talked to her. I said, "Why don't you come out and I'll show you what I did?" I said, "This guy's got a rifle out the window. He's just driving, wandering through the desert. This isn't hunting. That's a slob hunter." I said, "The game wardens would have busted him. I got him on a federal violation. I think it was $100 ticket. He deserved it." And she said, "You're right." She goes, "That's a good ticket, what you wrote." And I'll talk to the congressman, tell him, "Look, this guy's not an outstanding citizen. He's got a gun out the window hunting antelope. That's not how you hunt." And that calmed down. But it was political. Like, I write a ticket. The federal congressman for Wyoming at the time, and I forgot their name, they knew about it. They would know about my tickets. People would complain to their congressman. Very political. Having three different field offices, I started to realize certain laws you can't enforce unless the manager does their job. So I went up to Jackson Hole, the Snake River. Parts of it was BLM, a little chunk of a couple, I don't know, 7,000 acres along the Snake River. So I go up there. I've read the laws. I'm very familiar, thoroughly, understanding the laws. There's several, three, four rafting outfitters, guides that are running businesses. I go up there on a weekend, and they're running businesses without an outfitter's guide permit. And the reason why BLM has that so that they have liability insurance, that they take responsibility. They've got experts that are taking the people out on rafts, so it's not some fly by night dangerous operation. They have PFDs on that kind of thing, and they didn't have their BLM permit, so I wrote them tickets. You got to have a outfitter and guide permit to run a commercial operation on BLM lands. So I write, several tickets, three or four. These are good fines. And they tell me, "Well, the manager says I don't need it." And I'm like, "Yeah, right." But I meet with the manager and I'm saying, "This is in Pinedale." And I'm like, "I was up in Jackson Hole area on the Snake River. These outfitter and guides are saying they didn't need permits because you told them they didn't need it." And this manager, she said, "Yeah, they're right. I'm busy. My people are busy. We don't have time for issuing permits." So I just said, "Go ahead and do what you got to do." And I'm like, "That's illegal. You got to follow the law." And I said, "I wrote them tickets. And because of you, I have to go up there and dismiss those tickets. That's an embarrassment. I did my job. I'm a professional." "Well, Dave, I'm busy and, it's really not a big, it is a big deal. They have to have liability insurance. You don't want some fly by night operation taking people without PFDs and people drowning. I'll go up there, but no more. I'm not going to enforce any outfitter and guide permit stuff in your field office because you're not doing your job. That's on you." You know, I went up there and dismissed the tickets. It was an embarrassment. But I went to him, I said, "You're right. I'm going to dismiss this ticket and Central Violations Bureau ticket. You're not going to get it." And it's disappointing because I like Jackson Hole's beautiful. I mean, 90% of my area looked like the moon. It was nice to see beautiful mountains and green and trees. The Rock Springs field office, it had little pockets of nice areas, but I mean, millions of acres of just, it looked like the moon. Sagebrush, flat, no trees for as far as the eye can see. It wasn't very beautiful. This manager in Pinedale did another thing. Called me up and said, hey, the Pinedale Plateau is an important feeding ground for elk and mule deer, pronghorn. They come out of the mountains in the wintertime and they graze here. And this year, we really want to stop. One of the problems with snowmobilers would go up there and chase the elk around and they drop their horns. Because horn hunters, that's a big deal in Wyoming. I said, I've talked to the game wardens. They want to stop people from harassing wildlife for their horns. I'm all for it. I'm ready to go. By the way, did you do, a public notice at the mail post office? Did you do meetings? Did you put it in the CFR that you're going to close this area off? These are all the steps that you have to do legally in BLM to close land off to like snowmobiles. And she said, I don't have time for that, Dave. I said, well, I can't enforce the law then. Well, just put signs up. You don't have to write tickets. Just put signs up so they don't go in there. No, you have to do a public notice, a federal register notice. We are going to close this land off to snow machines between this time and this time. You can't go in there. And then you have to have a meeting. You meet with the local community, and you got to post the time of the meeting at like a post office or library or city hall in Pinedale. And you got to tell the people in the community. Yeah, well, we don't want to do that. It's going to upset people. I don't care. I can't write tickets. I can't enforce the law if you don't do that. And this is really critical for wintering feeding range for, again, mule deer, pronghorn, elk. Well, can't you just drive around and be seen? Be a presence. No, do your job. I can't do my job if you don't do your job. I mean, this is federal law. You can't just put signs and say this area is now closed. You can't do that. It's wrong. It's immoral. Federal law says you can't do that. And you got to go through these steps. And you know this. Well, Dave, I just don't have time and it upsets people, so we're not going to do that. Okay, well, I'm not going to enforce any laws up there. And it's sad because Pinedale is one of the prettier districts or field offices in the Rock Springs district. But I'm not going to go up there and do something that's illegal. This is the problem with BLM. These managers are lazy. They live in these communities. They love the outdoors and the scenery. They don't want to piss the community off, and they don't do their job. That's reality. That's absolute reality. A lot of these BLM managers are so political. They just didn't want to upset. Don't just drive around and be seen. Wave to people. It might scare them not to drive in there. No, I'm not going to do that. And then the rules and regulations on off-road vehicles at that time was establish roads and trails. Now, do you know what that means? If today you drive across the desert where there's no tracks and you leave two tracks, that becomes an established road and trail. Hopefully, they've done what the Forest Service did was a designated road and trail means it's on a map and it says this is an official road, this is where you stay. You don't go over here. But at that time, BLM didn't do that. It was established. So if someone drove through the desert and created tracks the next day, everybody else could drive on those two tracks because it's now an established road and trail. This is driving me crazy coming from the Park Service where everything was clean cut. These are the rules. And now I've got this is messed up. It's effed up. How the hell do I enforce established roads and trails? It's insane. Why am I here? And I started thinking about that. And I'm already applying to other jobs. I'm like, I can't accomplish anything. You know, you pull into up in Pinedale one day. I pulled into an overlook, and there's a beautiful trout stream. I pull in. There's a guy sees me. He's got a fishing pole. He's fishing, grabs his tackle box, and he just jumps in the stream and forwards. You know, it's up to his waist, crossing and runs off through the desert. And I'm like, I bet he doesn't have a fishing license, but I have no authority. Okay, and there's a lot of BLM ring. Oh yeah, well yeah, you have all this authority. No, you don't. There were BLM rangers I talked to in other states. I'd call them up. Do you deal with this? Oh, I just write them a federal ticket. You know, and it's like, for what? Well, under the Taylor Grazing Act says any violation of state natural resource laws is a violation of the Taylor Grazing Act. Oh, really? Did you read the part that means if you have a grazing permit on BLM and you commit a natural resource crime, your grazing permit can be pulled? That's all it means. The Taylor Grazing Act doesn't give you Fish and Game Authority. You can't check fisherman licenses off the Taylor Grazing Act. BLM had a real problem, especially in places like California, where they were like doing DUI stops on highways and doing fish and game checks and checking fisherman licenses. It's like they didn't have authority to do any of that. And sheriffs were going ballistic on them. There's a reason for that. BLM, if you don't have state peace officer authority granted by the state or by a sheriff, then you really are an armed security guard guarding, protecting government property. You know, it just became, why am I here? Near Aspen Mountain, near south of Rock Springs, I'm driving along and I um, see a guy again driving around, shooting out the window, shooting at ground squirrels like prairie dogs. And it's like, I'm seeing this. I have no authority to stop him, jurisdiction. You know, I called the game wardens and I'm seeing this, but I can't stop him. Just letting you know. This is where it's at. This is what's going on. And I eventually had to meet with game wardens and say, this is where my authority ends. One day I get a call on the radio. It was very rarely I could get anything out on the radio. And I remember game warden saying, you know, I'm at Lafarge over in near Kemmer area, Lincoln County. There's a BLM campground, but it's on Bureau of Reclamation lands. There's a guy that we caught shooting up the campsites. And the SAC, the special agent in charge in Cheyenne, said, you have no authority on BOR lands at that time, 1997. You cannot, no matter what happens, you have no jurisdiction on Bureau of Reclamation lands. And over the radio, I had to say, well, that's Bureau of Reclamation, correct? Well, yeah, but I said, I'm sorry, but I have no jurisdiction on that. You may want to call the sheriff and have him respond and have him do an investigation on, you know, vandalism of government property. It's embarrassing. I'm like, I never experienced this, not with Fish and Wildlife, not with the National Park Service. And in BLM, like, we don't have the authority to do a lot. The SAC, I remember talking to him, this is bullshit. It's a BLM campground. He goes, well, management made that mistake. They put it on BOR property. They put a BLM sign, but you are not to do any enforcement on it. Okay? You know? I had another case. So South Pass was the boundary between me and the Rawlings district ranger, and he was usually working with the agent. So I really like South Pass. It's a beautiful area. It was nice to see some beautiful scenery. It's near the Wind Rivers, and I did an investigation where this out this dude ranch out there was going on BLM lands and teaching people how to round up cows on public lands, illegal. And so I wrote a ticket on that, you know, harassing livestock. That was kind of an interesting case, and I worked with the local ranchers, and I was like, you know, yeah, they can't do that. That's illegal. Occasionally, on a rare occasion, I'd call the Forest Service officer up, Mel, really nice guy in Flaming Gorge. So he had the Flaming Gorge was Forest Service, surrounded by BLM south of Rock Springs, and then he had the Ashley National Forest. So I would do the loop, cross over through the Forest Service lands, and come back on BLM. Sometimes we would do joint patrols. The Flaming Gorge, especially the south end in Utah, was spectacular scenery. Just it is amazing. He was stationed out of Dutch John, but it's very remote. Dutch John's like 70 miles from either Rock Springs or Vernal, Utah. Um, but I worked with him. He was a good guy, and I learned a lot about the issues down there. There were some. The job, at some point, I realized this is not a serious law enforcement position. Like I said, I'm already applying to other places. And I did photography, and I was like, I'm going to take my camera, and I'm just going to enjoy exploring the really beautiful areas that do exist. Pine Mountain, I'd go up there, it was this plateau. So once you got above 8,000 feet, you'd have forested areas. So you'd have these scattered in the west. They call them island mountains. They're isolated by desert, but they're plateaus, and at the top, it's all forested. I'd go up there. Sometimes, I heard reports of wood cutting that was illegally occurring up there. Matter of fact, Pine Mountain, just out of the blue, one of the agents, not the good one, shows up in a suit and tie, and he goes, "Yeah, there's a report that like a Mormon militia group out of Vernal, Utah, is coming up on Pine Mountain, illegally cutting wood. I got a tip um, that they might be out there this weekend. So I'm here for the weekend. I want to work with you. We're going to go out there." And I said, "How many?" "Well, there could be, 5, 6 people." "Okay. You got your rifle with you?" "Oh, no, I left that back in the office in Cheyenne and my shotgun." I said, "Really? You want me to go with you? Do you have, you're in a suit and tie. Is this what you're wearing?" "Yeah." He's wearing a suit and tie. He wants to just go out there, do this investigation, and try to catch these guys in the act. No rifle, no shotgun. And I said, "No, not going to do it. I'm not going to get killed over wood." There were some very radical right wing groups. I have nothing against the Mormons, they're good people. I met a lot of Mormons out there that were really some of the nicest people I ever met. Honest to God, good people. But there were some very right wing extremist elements of them. And I'm like, 4 or 5 guys that they will have rifles and shotguns. And you want to go up there and investigate this. You're not prepared. You got loafers on. Come on. No, I'm just not going to do it. You don't have a bulletproof vest. I mean, these are dangerous people, and you want to go in a place where there's no radio, no cell phone. And the cell phones back then were these box cell phones. I had an antenna on my truck, and you punch it in and talk, and you can only use it, on the truck in the cigarette lighter. I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. It's not worth dying over firewood. I mean, if you came in with rifles and you had extra rangers, and it's like you want to make a big deal of this, great. But I'm not gonna. You're not prepared. Um, we had another incident just outside of Rock Springs. When one of these in the checkerboard 650-acre area, this guy for decades, you know, lived there with. He had like 50 cement mixers and pickup trucks and trailers, and he was going to do a gravel mining operation, and he was claiming the Mining Act allowed him to live there, but he wasn't extracting anything. He didn't do anything other than just put tons of junk on public lands. And they came to me. I remember the management saying, "This has been going on far too long. We got to get this guy out of here." I'm like, "Great," because I drove by it and I walked out there and I'm like, this is BS. All this garbage and junk cement mixers that weren't working, and machinery that just didn't operate. This guy's just living on public lands in a trailer. He's not mining anything, you know. I went out there, I looked at it, came back, and I said, "Have you given them warnings?" "Oh yeah, we've written multiple." multiple written warnings and posted it. And we've talked to him. We want you to do something. Okay, well, I'll arrest him. No, no, we can't have that because that'll upset the community. No, you've given him warnings. I'll talk to the U.S. Attorney's Office. He's been warned multiple times. He's not extract. He's in violation of the Mining Act. Uh, let's go in there and arrest him, cuff him up, and then we'll seize his equipment, pull it off public lands. He's abusing the system. Yeah, we don't want that. We just want you to talk to him and see if you can get him to move. No. Why? These people can be dangerous. Some of these guys that live out in the desert are kind of wackos. You want me to just talk to him? Please, will you please move? No, if your warning letters didn't work, it's time to arrest. But they said, no, we do not want you to arrest him. Oh, well, he's been there for, over 10 years. He can stay there. I don't care. If either you want him arrested, you want to do it the right way, and get all that crap moved out of public lands, or you don't. And they did. So when I left, he was still there. This is BLM. They just don't want you to be aggressive. Um, you know, Over in the Kemmerer district, you had a lot of fossil theft. But again, unless I work at night, unless I have a team of people that can do surveillance together so we can catch people in the act, it was impossible to make a case on theft of fossils and dinosaur bones. I did meet with the law enforcement national park ranger at Fossil Butte National Monument. I worked with him a couple times during hunting season, patrolling the boundaries, helping. They had some problems with poachers coming on the park, coming off BLM. So I did joint work with the National Park Service there. He was a good guy. Um, did some snowmobile patrols in the Kemmerer district, which was super fun. I mean, I had a Indy Polaris 500 snowmobile that was for me. And I also went out with a biologist. We'd go from Kemmerer all the way over, cut through the Bridger Teton National Forest, and then head over towards Cokeville. There was a ski resort that was inside BLM. We'd go there, turn around, come back. Never saw anyone, um, but you saw moose. I mean, it was just, you got up in the high country. It's beautiful, and being on snowmobile was just, it was really fun. But it wasn't law enforcement. Like I said, nobody was there. I mean, I literally it would go days and days and weeks of not running into people. And, you know, occasionally you'd see these little, they look like gypsy trailers. They were um, Basque sheep herders. And they were on BLM and they had grazing permits and they didn't speak English. I'd drive by them and they weren't very friendly. They just did their thing. They had their little trailer, their dog, and a flock of sheep. Um, the manager was like, I don't want you counting cows. I don't want you to do grazing enforcement. We got grazing range technicians that'll take care of that. Okay. It was just like, what is my purpose? On the rare occasion when I did run into people, they were always armed. I was in a place called Adobe Town, which is 50 miles, 60 miles from Rock Springs, same distance from Rawlings, near the Colorado Wyoming border, like a Badlands type area. Matter of fact, I had a rattlesnake hit my boot. They had these little pygmy rattlers, and they were all over the place. But I remember this dry wash, and I heard two ATVs coming, and I'm like, yeah, dry wash. It's not a big deal if they're using that to cruise around on. I mean, it's where if there's a heavy rain, it just floods through there, but it's dry most of the year. But they pulled up. They had shovels, and it was like, are they digging for fossils, which is illegal, vertebrate fossils? I don't know. But I stopped them. I mean, I hiked in a couple miles, and there were two ATVs, man and woman on each one, four people armed. They had big old 44 revolvers on them, big old barrels in their holsters, and I was what I learned to do was when I did run into people is lie to them. Hey, how you doing today? We've just so you know, you're going to see a lot of rangers down here. There's 5 of us on a detail down here. People are digging up dinosaur bones, and you probably know that's illegal. And so you're going to see me and the other rangers all over this place, you know, and we're going to be here for several weeks. And so we're don't be surprised if you see a bunch of us. And by the way, be careful of rattlesnakes. I just had one strike my boot, so they're everywhere. So be safe, okay? And you could just see them giving me the stink eye. It's like I think they were probably going to dig up dinosaur bones or fossils, but it was just like you could just tell. I didn't have anything to write them on, but just lying to them to make them think that there's a bunch of us. And they looked at each other and they turned around and they went back the way they came. Have a nice day. But that's the best I could do. Kind of put a little bit of, they didn't know. And so I had no problem with lying to them. Um, I saw something in the paper, an estate sale. Fossils for sale. Lots of fossils. Well, it was in the Green River area, and I drove to the estate sale in plain clothes. I drove my personal truck. I thought, I'll just walk around and see what they've got. And they had a tractor trailer load of fossils, bones, petrified wood. And I'm like, wow, where did this come from? And I'm talking to the family members, and they're like, well, here's the notes that, my dad passed away. He had all this, and we're selling it for thousands of dollars. We're making good money. I'm like, wow, this is cool stuff. Big giant slabs of fish fossils from the Blue Forest, which is, I think, near Camera. And I'm reading it, and I'm looking at the coordinates. He GPSed everything, and I could recognize some of them. Like, this is off BLM. I had a little camera with me. I took some pictures of the books and called the agents. Hey, this is what I got. I mean, I'm guessing $30,000 worth of fossils, dinosaur bones being sold. It came off a BLM according to this logbook. They're like, he's dead. What are we going to charge? Well, we can at least take it since it was pulled off BLM illegally, right? We can't make a case. So they weren't interested. Called U.S. Attorney's Office in Cheyenne. This is what I got. Can I seize all this? I've got a logbook that shows where all these things, and this guy was meticulous. So some like fossil wood would be 12. Where did 12 come from? Oh, it came from this coordinates. And I could go back to my truck. I had maps, and yeah, this was coming off solid BLM. And they were like, he's dead. Who are we going to charge? Yeah, you could. Nah, we're not interested. Which makes me think if BLM's not, and the federal government's not interested in actually protecting the resources that were stolen, they just want to make cases. This that doesn't make sense to me. It's about the resources, isn't it? Or is it just about making cases? I don't care if you can make a case. The guy's dead. Okay, fine, but this all these fossils and bones came off of federal land. They're like, we don't care. Why am I here? What is my purpose? And I kept saying it over and over. Um, but I did learn some good skills. So out there, there's no roads or anything. So, and our dispatch was through Wyoming Highway Patrol and at that time Wyoming Game and Fish used the same dispatch. On a rare occasion, I could reach them, and I used GPS UTM as a way of explaining where I was. Hey, I'm going to be out with this trailer, an abandoned trailer, trying to figure out if somebody's there or not. I had my Garmin mounted on the dash of my truck. I'm at this UTM, you know, 15569 321 north, 322456789, west or whatever. and I would give that to dispatch, and their dispatch knew that because they worked with the game wardens that also use UTM on GPS, and that's how. So instead of saying I'm at mile marker, like most cops are, I'd give them the UTM. Where am I at this point on the map? You know, 30 miles from Farson, near the front range of the Wind Rivers, the Prospect Range. At least they could. It might take, a day, 2 days, 3 days to get to where I was, but at least they knew where I was. Um, like I said, towards the end of my time there, it wasn't. I just was like, and the wintertime was miserable. You couldn't patrol in the wintertime most of the time. Occasionally you go out on the snowmobile, but most of the time it's blizzard conditions, blowing snow, too dangerous. I mean, it was just dangerous. It was. I was, you know, less than 10 miles from Green River to Rock Springs. It could take an hour doing like 10, 15 miles an hour in four-wheel drive, low, with your head out the window trying to read the guidepost to get to the office. I mean, how do I justify putting in even 8 hours a day? Make it to the office, read some rules and regulations over and over, and became thorough in understanding the BLM's, FLIPMA, the Federal Lands Protection and Management Act. Most of the time, the winter time there, you just couldn't do anything. The weather was just too dangerous. I usually kept like a week's worth of food. I had canned spam and canned goods I kept in a bag in the trunk. I had water, a couple gallons of water. Every time I went out, I had a Ford Bronco. Every time I went out, it was about, am I prepared if I get stuck somewhere? And I did get stuck once overnight up on a butte um, west of Rock Springs, between Rock Springs and Evanston, somewhere in between, and south of Fort Bridger. There was a place where there were a lot of arrowheads, and so I went up on the top of this butte. And you learn, I learned the hard way. Um, there's a special type of soil. It's white, and it looks like bricks, kind of, and it's dry. There could be a little bit of sand on it, and you drive across it, and you sink into this gooey quicksand, and you can't get out of it. And if you got a win, I had a winch on my Bronco, but there's no trees out there, so it's hard to find a place to pull yourself out of. And so I spent the night out there once. I just got stuck. I had food. It was just like, I had a little campfire. I remember being out in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't get out on radio, and I'm like, maybe somebody will see me. Hopefully, it was a long walk. May as well just. I had a week's worth of food. Make the best of it. Eventually, some rancher was up there, and I was like, I'm stuck. I've been here overnight. And he laughed and he goes, it happens. He goes, you know, and I forgot the term now. I used to know it, but it's white and it's crusty looking. And I learned never to drive through that crap because it looks dry and you're just driving along and all of a sudden you're in like 2 feet of this goo. And he hooked his winch up to the near the axle and slowly pulled me out of it. And this stuff is like clumped, and it was like cement and alkaline flats. That's what it was. It was an alkaline. It was white on top, and there's moisture underneath, water underneath. You know, you learn. And I learned to never cross alkaline flats. I'd see that stuff and I'd be like, I know what that is, and I'm not going to cross it ever again. But like I said, towards the end, I just carried a camera and just explored. And these island mountains, there's several buttes near south of Fort Bridger. There was one. There was an old cabin from probably the 1800s, And you get up there and it's all desert all around you. It's flat, but you go up in the butte and there's aspens and pines and just it's gorgeous, you know. And near the Steamboat Mountain, you got Boar's Tusk, which is a rock formation that sticks up like a pinnacle. Then you got the Kilpecker Sand Dunes, but you got Steamboat Mountain, and another one of these places where it's all desert. It's kind of the White Mountains, not very scenic. But I drove up to the top. I remember having lunch up there, and all of a sudden it's this green alpine meadow. Because then you get up to 9,000 feet, and you got fir trees, you got aspens, and it's all green like a pocket of green on top of this squared butte. And you stand on the edge, and you're just looking out this endless expanse of desert, the red desert, and you're like, wow, it is an amazing place. It is a unique landscape. Um, there were areas that they wanted to create wilderness, designate wilderness areas, but they didn't. So they called them wilderness study areas. And I tried to establish a good working rapport with the game wardens. They're good guys, and I made a few cases, wrote tickets based on them. They'd be like, "Hey, there's a guy parked in the wilderness study area, off roads and trails. We're checking, elk hunters." And I wrote tickets. And I always told get plate numbers, information, all the information you can. Take a picture if you can, and they did. So I did write a few, you know, off-road vehicle cases based on game wardens giving me information. Um, there was a really good deputy sheriff for Sweetwater County, and I'd go out and do joint patrols with him out near Farce, and he would show me some of the problem areas. It was like I said, there were some really beautiful areas. Um, this place north of Cokeville, up in the mountains, um, the Trump or Tump Tunip Range, was near the along the boundary of the Bridger Teton National Forest. It was gorgeous, just spectacular near Cokeville. It's a pretty town. But eventually, I got a job in California. It's just like this. The Rock Springs job could have been really cool if I'd been deputized. Although there were 6 or 7 counties I covered, but I needed support from the rest of the BLM staff. Managers, I needed your support. You needed to follow the law on closures. You needed to follow the law on doing, you know, doing the outfitter and guide permits. Otherwise, I was a truck driver basically. And I'm still very good friends with the ranger that was in Rawlings. He went on to become a BLM special agent. Great guy, and you know, he I should have listened to his advice. He goes, "This is a job where you can make good money and nobody bugs you. You just do your own thing out there." He goes, "Either you accept what's out there and the job and just have fun with it, or if you want to move on to something more exciting, but don't have these high expectations. BLM's not going to change." And he was right. You know, I took it too serious. Like I was still young. I was At that time there were 4 rangers in Wyoming: Rawlins, Rock Springs, Warland, and Casper. Nobody knew what the Casper Ranger did. He never wrote any tickets. Nobody ever saw him. Not even the sheriff's department. Not even the game wardens. Who knows what he did? But he was always happy. The Warland district ranger, he was a good guy. He was an old timer. Matter of fact, he had been one of the Marlboro cigarette men. He was a BLM ranger. Um, and because he had started when it started out, early days, he didn't have the age requirement, mandatory retirement. So he had to be in his mid to late 60s. He was still a ranger, an old cowboy. He was a good guy. And I'm sure I annoyed him and the other ranger and the good agent, because I was just like, I want to get into stuff. I'm still young. I'm ready to kick ass. And it's just like, I can't do anything. things maybe have changed. I had heard now there instead of one ranger, there's three. One for Pinedale, one for Rock Springs, one for Kemmer, and that's great if that's what it is. Um, but it was especially the winters got to me where I couldn't do anything, and I was just sitting in the office twiddling my thumbs. It's like you just can't go out. It's blizzard conditions. But it was an experience. It is what it is. I was out there. I would see moose. I would see elk. Uh, you know, bighorn sheep. When I went and drove through the Ashley National Forest around Flaming Gorge, I saw some bighorns from time to time. And you know, it was an experience. I got to know Southwest Wyoming like the back of my hand, and I explored every little back road that I could, and took lots of good pictures. And sometimes I flipped through those pictures saying, you know what? I got to see a lot of stuff that I'll never see again, and a lot of people will never have that opportunity. So, anyway, hopefully things are changed now. Again, that was a long time ago. But I'm doing my series of all my jobs. That was one of my positions as a district ranger, as a 1801 with the Bureau of Land Management, Department of Interior, and I was the Rock Springs District Ranger. And thank you for listening. And if you guys still, if there's anybody listening that's a ranger there now, you know, I hope things have changed because things were kind of difficult back when I was there. Again, thank you.